I'm John Batchelor. This is a special edition of the New World Report, and I'm very pleased to be in Washington, D.C., thanks to my host, the Center for Free Society, and my leader, the Executive Director, Joseph Umar. However, joining me for these next moments is a distinguished panel from Colombia, but speaking to the continent, to the subcontinent, and to all the mysteries of Latin America these last months and years. I welcome Senator María Fernanda Cabal of the Colombia legislature, Ambassador Santos, former ambassador to the United States from Colombia, former vice president of his country. And I want to speak especially to the professor, because I asked the professor to mention the name of his institute in Spanish. Would you please tell me, because I don't have it?
Yes, John, thank you very much. Instituto de Ciencia, Política, Hernán Echavarría Olózaga.
Thank you. We will begin immediately with the question of what I reported on with Joseph and others these last days. A news item from Reuters. An array of guns were displayed by the National Police in Bogota, attached to what I'm told is a breakaway unit of the original FARC threat. The guns were displayed, including a machine gun, as a sign that the Petro government was moving effectively against outlaws. At the same time, we're told the Petro government is offering, well, the word is peace, amnesty to bad actors. I want to begin there because it's time to reflect about what we know so far about Gustavo Petro. The senator and Joseph taught me in the course of the election process in Colombia that Gustavo Petro has a background including being an outlaw, which was surprising to me, but everybody has opportunity for a second chance in life. So I begin with María, Senator. These display of guns, what does that mean about President Petro and his intentions for Colombia? Thank you.
Thank you, John. First of all, we can question what happened with the peace process that former President Santos did, because the former FARC guerrilla has impunity, has 10 seats in the Congress. They built a special justice system that fits on their desires. And afterward, you see 22 groups that are still killing Colombian people. So what happened? And what happened is that we still have coke plant crops. We have more than 202,000 hectares today. And what we fear now is that President Petro is saying to the peasants that grow coke plants that he is not going to do anything until we find another way for the peasants to live. So what we see is that the groups are still on, are getting most powerful, and are protected by Venezuelan regime. Venezuelan regime protects ELN and FARC. But Petro is moving on his new best friend, which is Maduro. So all these things put us on a very weak position. Remember that Gustavo Petro also beheaded 52 generals from the army and the police, generals that had 30 years, experience of 30 years that has been cut off. So when you weaken the public forces, you finally let the criminals to increase their power and the citizens to feel completely without any protection.
Mr. Ambassador, what does the display of guns mean? How should I regard it here?
As a drop of water in the ocean. That's what it was. The guerrillas are stronger than ever. As María Fernanda said, they have a total sanctuary in Venezuela. They're growing because coca is growing. We had a peace process with one group, and out of it came 2 new groups of FARC. The drug traffickers got increased power because part of the negotiation with the FARC was take away the control of drugs So in the year 2013, we had 60,000 hectares of coca, which we had come down from almost 200,000 10 years before. And in 5 years, when President Santos and the FARC finished the peace process, it got back to more than 220,000. So they have power, they have money, they control territory, and now President Petro is telling them, don't worry, we'll make total peace. We don't know what that means. We will create a ceasefire, which even the ELN said, no, we haven't agreed to it. We don't know what type of ceasefire it is. But what we know today is that Petro's view of what the armed forces should do, the police should do, and how they should confront criminals is totally different than what you and me have. He thinks that right now you need to stop the police and stop the army from doing their job, because otherwise he will not get his peace. He doesn't understand that peace, you arrive to peace when you really have the bad guys under control. So we'll see the bad guys, the FARC, the ELN, the drug traffickers grow in power, control more territory, and a society that is going to feel a lot more threatened in the next 2 to 3 years.
Professor Chacón, how does civil society regard that display of guns? Does that reassure people in Bogota and Medellin?
Civil society is suffering for the violence in many territories of the country. But I think it's important this conversation put in numbers, and let me give you a brief overview of the situation of organized crime and illicit economies in Colombia, because I think it's complementary with the Senator Cabal and Ambassador Santos said, that we need that you understand the strategic context and the risks of the government's peace policy. There has been 43% increase in the area planted with coca in the country. Potential cocaine production also reached an all-time high level, 1,400 tons, maintaining the upward trend that has been consolidating since 2014. 12 of the 14 production enclaves are located in border departments or departments with direct access to sea. Different studies estimate that, in general, drug trafficking has a weight in the national economy that could reach 2 or 3% of the GDP. That's the reality. At least 3 large illegal structures in the country can be identified. 33 dissident structures of the FARC-EP, 8 fronts of the National Liberation Army ELN guerrilla, and 22 organized crime groups. Approximately 20,000 people make up these groups, including men and arms and support networks. In addition, there is a presence of Mexican cartels and Venezuela mafias, such as the so-called Aragua train, el Tren de Aragua. The Petro government's project, the called Total Peace or Paz Total, seeks to negotiate peace agreements with these guerrillas and reach agreements to submit to justice with other organized crime groups. But that we are seeking is improvisation in the ceasefire with the ELN, lack of clarity regarding negotiation mechanisms, accelerated loss of territorial control by the security forces, and what appears to be an absence of strategy and capabilities to confront the various criminal groups that decide to not negotiate or submit to justice. So in these months that we have seen is a decrease of the goals of coca eradication by more than 50%, the suspension of the bombing of the camps of the criminal groups, and the fumigation with glyphosate. Neither have objectives or strategic high values been captured or taken down, while the assassination of social leaders and massacres continue. There are already at least 6 massacres this year. So the people is in middle of an incumbent government and the criminal groups that have enormous power in the regions.
Let's go to part of the problem, the Venezuela border. I am speaking with Senator María Fernanda Cabal, Ambassador Ambassador Francisco Santos, and Professor Chacón. We are at the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. This is a special edition of the New World Report, and we're headed to Venezuela. I'm John Batchelor. This is the New World Report special edition. I'm at the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. We are speaking of the troubles in our neighbors to the south. The New World is one continuous drifting series of continental blocks. However, we are united in that we've all been here 15,000 years. That's it. And we are challenged now by enormous changes in the climate, in agriculture, in resources, in competition. But at the same time, we're challenged by polity, especially the bad acting polity of Caracas, Venezuela. With me are Senator María Fernanda Cabal, who has taught me a deal about the presence of bad actors in Latin America, in South America. A deal of it I didn't understand because my education only included the headlines that you get in New York, not the depth that you get with people who live there. Ambassador Santos is here and Professor Chacón to comment on Venezuela. María, I begin with you because President Petro has reached out to open the border with Venezuela. At the same time, I believe there's an exchange of ambassadors. It's about to happen or already has happened. Does Caracas represent a threat to the people of Colombia?
Yes. We share a border of more than 2,000 kilometers. In the past, our common history has legal and illegal business, always. The matter is, as soon as Venezuela turned to be a communist, and also having new friends as Iran, as Russia, and China, but especially this marriage between communism and Islam, we start to face the threats. Maduro's regime has attacked because they protect the ELN and FARC. ELN and FARC has attacked the military base in the frontier, has shot the helicopter where the former President Duque were flying on. They have displaced, Maduro's regime, Maduro, displaced more than 30,000 Colombian people that has been living for decades in Venezuela, the same as Hitler did with the Jews, putting a letter D in the houses of the Colombian people to demolish. You can see the videos. But apparently now this is a new best friend, the same as former President Santos did with Chavez. They don't care, and you have to understand it, because both of them share the same crazy ideas that they are the reincarnation of Simon Bolivar. They use all the myths about Bolivar to try to build the Gran Colombia that was before our nation, Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela as the new country. So they open the border. The border always have human trafficking, weapon trafficking, drug trafficking, everything, some legal, some illegal business. But today you cannot do any business in Venezuela without the control and the approval of the Cartel de los Soles, which is the cartel of the militaries.
Mr. Ambassador, what does Caracas represent? What should we know about it here?
Caracas represents a threat not only to Colombia, but to democracy in the region. Caracas is the landing spot for Russia, a disruptor, and Iran, which through Hezbollah and the Lebanese communities all over the region is gaining money from illegal sources, and is at this precise moment training Venezuela in an asymmetric war with drones, exactly the ones they are using in Ukraine. Venezuela is not a nation state. Venezuela is the Somalia of Latin America. It's controlled by drug traffickers in some area, illegal groups in some other, military, corrupt military in others, and the state no longer exists. It depends on where you are, who will control the area. The border is controlled basically, even more than the armed forces, by the ELN and by the FARC. And they charge for everything that comes by, that goes from one side to the other. They charge for a contraband. They charge for drug trafficking because Venezuela has become an export of drugs. So the border is just an element of a crisis that is bigger. And finally, when I was ambassador, I remember a general from the Marine of Colombia and said, we can't move in Colombia because everything we do is known in Caracas. And I said, how did you find out? And I said, because you can buy intelligence in Caracas very easily. And we know that the Russians work side by side with the Venezuelans on cyber intelligence. They know exactly when a general moves any place in Colombia. They know all of the movements of the Colombian armed forces. So they do it for Colombia. They can do it for somewhere else. But Venezuela is the hub of criminality in the region and is going to become a hotspot for instability that will be transmitted into the rest of the region, which we will talk afterwards when we talk about the future of Latin America.
Professor, about what we call in the United States the chattering classes, the editorial pages, the TV commentators, the radio, are they well informed about what the ambassador and the senator have just said about Venezuela? Are they aware of the scale of the threat?
I don't think so. Historically, the Colombian state has been unable to control the border with Colombia, but the government, the Petro government's current policy of restoring relations with Venezuela, in addition to legitimize the criminal regime of Nicolás Maduro, implies an enormous risk, not only from Colombia, for the region, but the regions. The reestablishment of commercial relations, which in practice face enormous legal and material challenges, can be used for money laundering operations and the creation of new value and supply chain illegal economies, considering that the recent years the ELN and the FARC dissidents and other criminal structures operate in both sides of the border. If you talk about the principal allies of Caracas, like China, Iran, and Russia, with their plans to penetration and interferences in the region, it is clear that the current Colombian government does not consider them as a risk or a threat, and we will see in the coming year that strengthening diplomatic and trade relations with these regimes. The problem will be that they will have a consolidated theater of operation in the north of South America between Venezuela and Colombia, with a sphere of influence in various sectors, making it increasingly difficult to counteract their presence and that of their criminal proxies, such as Hezbollah or Russian mafias or whatever, and other criminal organizations. Right now in Colombia, the pro-China and pro-Russia Colombian academic sectors
30 seconds, Professor. 30
now
seconds.
have spaces of influence in the current government. So it is to be expected that in the coming years, we will see an increase in the presence of these countries in Colombia. We need to strengthen the network of experts and political support at the national and international levels to monitor and inform public opinion about the implications of the relations with these regimes.
We started in Bogota, we went to Caracas, we're headed to all the capitals of South and Central America and the world, because you might not be interested in Latin America, but Latin America is interested in you. This is the New World Report Special Edition with Senator María Fernanda Cabal, Ambassador Santos, and Professor Chacón. We're speaking of the world of Latin America today after a series of elections that have transformed, I'm told, the map of polity in Latin America. Just the ones that I've reported on with Joseph Umar's help. Most recently, Brazil, of course. But before that, we had Peru, we had Bogota, Colombia, of course. We had Nicaragua, if you can call that an election. We've had elections in Mexico. Certainly elections are influential for the direction of the continent, but sometimes it appears that these left-of-center presidents are either working together or coincidentally moving in the same direction. They have an intentionality. And I'm certain that there are very careful precedents for what's going on. I don't know about it. But I note that President Lula da Silva, for example, has embraced the man we speak of, President Maduro. I know that President Petro has embraced diplomatically President Maduro. I know that President AMLO, Lopez Obrador of Mexico, has spoken gently of the activities of Venezuela, but also the whole region in sympathy with Venezuela, certainly Havana. So I ask my panelists very carefully, and I don't want to load the question up. I want to be as neutral as possible, because remember, I'm an uneducated American reader of newspapers in English, so I don't have the sophistication to understand the depth of this. But is there a trend accidentally, or is this a purposeful trend that we're watching here, where when Castillo was disinvited from the presidency, many of these voices spoke out? Do they speak out coincidentally together, or is there coordination? María?
It's absolutely coordinated. It started in Chile, in fact, when they destroy the most stable and powerful economy. Then afterwards, it moved to Peru and it moved to Colombia. The riots happened here with the Antifa crazy youth here in the US too. And then you see how it works. But the base of this is the Foro de Sao Paulo. Remember that when the Berlin Wall fallen down in 1989, Lula da Silva moved quickly with Fidel Castro to build a strategy to keep communism and spread it in Latin America. And they did it successfully because they used Hugo Chavez money to buy everything. And among that, remember the big scandal of Odebrecht, and this big scandal of a private enterprise, a private company, bought and paid for elections everywhere in Latin America. So what you see now is how the Foro de Sao Paulo, that is a communist platform with a new brand, moved into the Grupo de Puebla, which is a convict former president and vice presidents that get together. And after Grupo de Puebla grown, then they start to build the International Progressist Movement, which is the platform where they are going to keep in power for decades, maybe for centuries, and they are going to be the worst threat for freedom for all of us. But you cannot forget that there is the Russian weapon, which means that it's not the weapon like in the wars in the past. The weapon is through the internet. The weapon is through the media. We recently, through the Twitter files, discovered that Petro's campaign was directed in the media, in the Twitter, by bots from Russia directly. It was uncovered by journalist Mark Taibbi, and you could see exactly from first to second round how they handled to change Colombian perception among the election of President Petro.
Ambassador Santos?
There's no coincidence. It has been planned. Look, the two countries that were the most stable and had the most economic success, all of a sudden are in the hands of radical leftists after some protests. You don't organize a protest and you burn the line of the subway in one night if you're not organized.
This is Santiago, Chile, in
Santiago.
2019.
Yeah,
yes.
Where did they organize it from? From former Communist Party, which Russia had still contacts with them, with anarchist organizations that they funneled. The same thing happened in Colombia. They discovered agents from Russia. By the way, the embassy of Russia in Colombia is bigger than the embassy of Russia in England. Guess what they're doing? It's not commerce. It's not great relations. It's all spying. It's all what they're doing. And they were able to prove that they financed part of the violent groups in the riots in 2021.
Yes.
They're doing exactly the same thing in Peru today. After Castillo was taken down legally, they started moving the Maoistas, the Senderistas, the same groups, they're 5,000, 10,000, and they have, right now, they're blocking Peru just like they blocked Colombia. During 3 weeks or a month, they blocked Colombia, they created such havoc. That creates a narrative, a discontent like they created in Peru, and they're able to elect Boric on the one hand, Petro on the other, and what they want to do in Peru is exactly the same modus operandi is to get Castillo back. So you have to understand that the disruption of Russia in Latin America is real, is present, is going to grow, is low cost and very high reward and outcome. So the U.S. that doesn't look at Latin America, that we don't exist, to be very sincere, if they don't, they're going to have a region that is going to be very, very hostile to them.
Professor Chacón, you speak much with the legislators in Bogota. Are they informed of these concerns? Have they reached a decision that this is either coincidence that everybody's going in the same direction or there's coordination?
I don't know. At least very few congressmen, congresswoman like Senator Cabal is aware about this reality. But I think that's the problem, because the left wins in Latin America because they build networks that operate in different stages, in cultural stages, in media, in the academia, in the political. And we need to recognize that the political actors lose the narrative. And lose the narrative because they don't support in the civil society, in the citizen movements that defend the democracy. You know? And this is a moment that we need to recognize that reality. We need to strengthen the civil society, to build a citizen movement, as María Corina said in her video. It's difficult because the narrative against the Foro de Sao Paulo or the Castro Chavismo lose the elections. The people don't be afraid about that. The people don't believe about that reality. It's a reality, but the people that suffer poverty, violence, is not worried about that. And we need to build a new narrative and build a contra-narrative about the leftist programs, political programs, and we need to start to work with the people to awake them about these threats, about the narrative, about the problems, and start with the values of democracy, of liberal democracy, not all democracy, liberal democracy, the economic freedom, the property right. It's time to start to work with the people and build the basis of the social movement that can confront the populism and the authoritarianism in Latin America.
One man, is there one man in charge? Is Lula da Silva Sr., is AMLO Sr., is Maduro Sr.? Mr. Ambassador, is there one man who leads all of this, or is it a collective?
No, it's a collective. It's a collective that starts with the Foro de Sao Paulo, that moves into the El Grupo de Puebla. It's a collective that has huge input from Cuba plays a critical role.
Yes.
Russia is more active today in Latin America than during the Cold War. A lot more active. And they understand how to do things, and they do it a lot easier. So it's a collective interest that, by the way, joins this leftist version and vision of the world with the capability of Russia to amplify and create a hostile environment for the US. Russia doesn't give a damn about Latin America. They want to create damage to the US and create a hostile environment to the US. That's what they have in mind. And now that they're losing in Ukraine, that's going to get even worse in the future.
China. We've not mentioned China, but it's a player because it has a checkbook. Is China part of this thinking? Did they use it?
Yes, because China, since decades, understood that they need to grow because they have a lot of population. They need to compete to be the first against the US. So they start conquering first Africa because of the prime materials. Afterwards, they move to Latin America. And in fact, it is a US result of the wrong foreign policy. They forgot us. They forgot that we could bring, a better way of living if you open our markets, if you open your market. And they just prefer to run away to Asia and to Afghanistan and whatever. And they forgot the South, Latin America. So Chinese get into countries like ours with a check saying we're going to help you to grow. And if you need investments, of course, it's very attractive, the money from China. But it has a double purpose because it's a new kind of conquering new lands.
I'm speaking with Senator María Fernanda Cabal, Ambassador Francisco Santos, and Professor Carlos Augusto Chacón. We're speaking about the challenge from Colombia to Caracas to the whole region. And when we come back, I'm going to ask a fun question. What is a vision for Latin America, for especially Colombia? We have deep-seated history with the United States. What is a vision for the 21st century? Because we've described a dystopia. Is there another version that's possible? This is a special edition of the New World Report. I'm John Batchelor at the Spy Museum in happy and rainy, but happy Washington, D.C., thanks to the Secure Free Society and Joseph Umar. And we'll be right back. I'm John Batchelor. This is a special edition of the New World Report with Senator Cabal speaking very carefully about China's, Ambassador Santos speaking of Russia, and Professor Chacón speaking of civil society. And I want to begin with the professor about civil society. What is a vision for the civil society in Colombia for the future that you recommend, that you think is restorative to all of the damage we've been speaking of?
But I need to start making a presentation of two possible scenarios. First scenario, it is possible to maintain the democratic institutional framework in Colombia and the current constitutional order. A concentration of power in hands of the government is avoided. The government parties are prevented from winning the local elections in next October this year. It is possible to expose public opinion and of the international community the impact and effects of the peace policy, as well as the economic ones that up now are confiscatory, contrary to economic freedom and property. This could lead to elections, to free elections being held in 2026, and there may be some possibility of democratic alternation in power. But it will require a political project that responds to the needs of the people, capable to presenting a proposal for the future and recovery that includes the most affected sectors. It will not be enough with a project against Petro or the left. The second scenario is in which Petro's political project managed to win the October elections, seize control agencies and the judiciary, and initiate a process to change the constitution, in which case it would be several decades of instability in Colombia
playbook,
and the
Professor.
region.
That's the playbook.
That's the playbook.
Nicaragua, Venezuela, yes.
Even
you
Chile.
win one man, one vote, one time. You're out.
Yep.
And that's the playbook you see as a possibility.
It's a possibility. It's the second scenario. And in this scenario, it will be no future for Colombia. Decades of instability, of criminal.
I like your first scenario better.
Me too.
We hope so. The first
Mr.
scenario.
Ambassador, what's your vision for Colombia and the region for the 21st century?
Colombia plays a critical role. And what happens in Colombia will have a huge impact in the rest of the region. Look at how they're fighting Peru. They're fighting to get back Castillo or something like it in Peru because they understand that they lost for the first time one battle. The battle they cannot lose is Colombia because of the importance, because of the size, because of geographical space, because of its impact all over the region. So I see that it's going to be a battle the next 3 years to maintain democracy. And 2023 is going to be critical for various reasons. One, we have a huge law that he wants to implement regarding pensions. And we need to mobilize millions of pensioners telling them you're going to lose your money, which they will. And mobilizing them is not, let's go one time, let's go and stay out on the streets. The second law is, we got to learn from the other guys that they knew how to do it, and we're going to have to learn how to do it too. A law changing absolutely the health system. The health system, which is the top 15 in the world, and top in Latin America. Coverage universal, it's an amazing health system. He wants to destroy it. We need to mobilize millions of patients that are going, and we have to teach them, tell them, look, you're going to lose your access to medicine, you're going to lose to access, so that they understand that their life is it's going to be played out, and that they need to go out on the streets. My optimism is that I went to 2 of the first protests that we had, which, to be very sincere, nobody knew what they were about. Some said, no, Petro, for the army, there were not. And that's one of the things that we need to do. We need to really create messaging to mobilize people to get their compromise, because this is a street battle that we're going to get into. And I spoke to many people in the protest, and I said, thank you for coming here. They said to me, I said, no. Are you ready to come out as many times as we need? Yes. Are you willing to stay weeks on end in the streets to avoid dictatorship in Colombia and to protect democracy for your sons? And I heard so many people convinced about it that I think we have a big chance of winning this battle if Petro tries to destroy democracy. So Colombian society is ready. I think the resiliency of the Colombian people is something that is very different from the rest of the continent, but I think it's going to be a battle.
Senator, your vision for Colombia.
Well, sometimes I open my eyes and I wish that the bad dream has gone, but it's still there. For the first time, we have a communist president, not socialist, because socialist is trying to fix the worst. A communist president, but I think that Petro is not as clever as we thought. Petro opened many battlefields at the same time. And when you try to fight everyone, people react. People are not stupid. So he, as quick as he started defeating the establishment, that some establishment helped them to get there, the reaction of people is also ruining some of the myth that he created among him and among his cabinet. His cabinet is full of ignorant people that never had a business before, that they are just like when a pirate get, and discovering that you can get many things from your new job. You finally lose the confidence on the people. Even the people that voted for Petro are losing the confidence. So we have been living, Mr. Batchelor, for decades, for centuries, violence. We are a violent society since our independence. The variable of narco-traffics is one of the worst threats that we have faced. But finally, I'm hopeful that we can resist, that our institutions would respond, that I'm very surprised of what is happening with the justice system that told Petro, you cannot direct us. We have separation of powers. You cannot give us the decisions that we have to take. And that's a reaction that makes us confident that we could survive.
I want to thank Senator María Fernanda Cabal of the Legislature of Colombia, the Republic of Colombia, Ambassador Francisco Santos, a passionate speaker about Colombia, but about the region as well, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to hear you look at the future. And Professor, thank you very much for your thoughtful and fact-filled presentation about the scale of the threat. It's all news to me, and it's a pleasure to speak of these matters, even if it's unhappy.
Thank you.
I thank you all very much. This is the New World Report, a special edition, and I'm John Batchelor. And I thank the audience for being so careful. Thank you very much.